Today we'll be talking about the generative AI impact on software engineering team productivity. This team, it's really important to us. It is something that we've been doing for a while, and we are really proud to be here. I really hope you're enjoying the re:Invent. And with me, I have...
Hi guys, I'm LG. I'm a developer here on our AI product, and I'll be giving you guys a hands-on a bit later down.
Perfect. So we wanted to start this talk by talking about the time that the developers actually spend coding. This is kind of crazy, but we tried to find some sources, and from the code time report, we found out that developers spend a median of 52 minutes coding in a daily basis, and which brings us to 4 hours and 21 minutes per week coding. This is numbers that sometimes we can be suspicious about it, but in fact, we have a source that really tells us that. We found multiple sources saying the same thing, and we are thinking, why this happen? Like, why the developers are spending just that amount of time coding? And probably some of you will find this really familiar. So basically, developers are not only coding. They need to study. They need to understand the technologies that they want to use. They need to go after the challenges, try to understand their challenges, and give a better and try to find a better way to approach these challenges. So they use a lot of Stack Overflow for that. They're going to the websites, to the website, the Stack Overflow website, try to understand if there's other person that's already passed through something similar to it. And of course, they're going to be going to the IDE, try to see if their appearance is good or not. LG here is not a huge fan of the dark theme.
But they made me use it.
But today, I really wanted you to not have your eyes burned, so I asked him to use the dark mode for you guys. But let's continue moving forward. So what I'm trying to say here is basically that developers need to do a lot of things other than just coding. They need to spend a lot of time doing multiple things. And here, what we understand is that we need to have a way to increase the productivity of developers while also helping in their developer experience in their day-by-day, because this is an important part of the developer's journey. And what we understand is that, according to McKinsey, the productivity of developers of software engineering teams can be increased from 20 to 40% while using Gen AI. So these numbers are really impressive. And the main potential gains it will be generating initial code drafts, guaranteeing the code correction, code refactoring, making analysis of the root cause, automating tests, and even generating new system designs. So, okay. As you can see here, we software engineers are really affected or impacted by the Gen AI. As you can see here, it's about, we're saying here that for a market, we can be impacted in the market by $400 billion. This amount, it's like what we got from the McKinsey report as well. And this means that the impact in Gen AI regarding their daily jobs, the developers' lives, and how they will be doing things in the next years will be changing, because they are going to be using the Gen AI for all those topics that I said to you guys, and more than we don't even know yet. So we already have a lot of platforms that are helping developers, for example, in their coding experience. They're helping the developers by generating code. So here it's a little bit of a meme, but there's a lot of people that are building things using, for example, ChatGPT or the LLMs, and they're creating like monsters, and they don't know exactly what it does. And this is kind of crazy, right? Because people are trying to understand and have a better experience and try to see how can they get better at their day-by-day, but things are not exactly simple, since a lot of the answers that the LLMs give to us is too generic. And we are in a place that enterprises has a lot of information, a lot of data, and we can, of course, use that to have a better answer when using LLMs. So it's really important to us to use context to guarantee that all the developers will have answers that are contextualized with the information that you should be using in your day-by-day. So you may ask here two things: how we can do that, and the second thing is, from where we get this information. So I brought you a lot of another plot. We have the source there, but basically you can see that the volume of data in zettabytes is growing up and up. In 2025, we're supposed to have 181 zettabytes of data. And data is information. Information, of course, can be translated to knowledge. And knowledge can be used as a context to contextualize the AI and the LLMs to give us a better answer. So this is pretty important for us because we're going to show you guys a little bit more of our platform. And what we're doing, it's basically that. So our answer to the where to get information, it's from your companies. And the answer from how to get this information to be used by the LLMs and by the StackSpot AI, in fact, it's StackSpot AI. So we have what you're calling here an agent that helps contextualize the AI with specific information that you provide to us. We are calling this a hyper-contextualization agent. And what we want to do with this hyper-contextualization agent is to accelerate the coding process, is to guarantee the best practices with StackSpot ecosystem. You understand a little bit better what we're going through. And also to guarantee that the developers have a better experience. So we are really worried about that experience. And StackSpot is all about that, in fact. I really wanted you to also take a look at what we are doing with the Enterprise Developer Platform. So yeah, we have an Enterprise Developer Platform, and we are really worried about productivity and also guaranteeing the usage of context to generate a better developer experience. Our main goals here with StackSpot AI is to increase developers' productivity by using the hyper-contextualization, but we want to set a golden standard in the market related to code generation. So this is really something that is important to us, and that's what we're trying to do here. So what you're seeing right now, it's a GIF that showcases a little bit of the StackSpot AI in action. So you can see that we have a chat on the left side. You can interact with it. We also have what we're calling quick comments. I'm not going to give too much spoilers because we are going to show this in action. This is really something that we want you to see how it works. But StackSpot AI, like I said, uses the power of hypercontextualization. And you may ask, what is hypercontextualization? What context are you bringing to the table? Basically, we have some concepts that we already had in the StackSpot Enterprise Developer Platform that we are calling studios. That is basically a way to organize and distribute content for the whole company. So one of the things that, for example, we organize and distribute, it's what we're calling stacks, which is basically the technology vision of a company inside, package it, and then input it into the studios. So this is a big part of StackSpot, and this makes the LLM to be contextualized with the exact technology vision of your company, and all the answers that you're going to receive from the LLM will be will be instructed to be using these guidelines, these stacks, and this technology vision. So dependencies, framework language, if you're going to use a task framework and all this stuff, you're going to set this, and this is part of the important thing here that we're calling contextualization. Other than that, we also use your codes. So, of course, we have a lot of code. We have a lot of applications. Why we cannot use this to contextualize the AI? Why cannot use, like, for example, your catalog of APIs to guarantee that some information there can be used to generate integration with it? So I'm just going to show you that too, but basically, if you have APIs and you have the LLM, it could just deliver to you integration using the stack vision that you have and all the technology that you have. So this is really an important part of what we are trying to offer you guys here. So right now, I really wanted LG to showcase to you and do the demo. So I'm going to pass to him, and now it's your time.
Okay, so hi again, everyone. So here, I've opened up to start. Since we're aiming at the developer with our coding assistant, we believe that the best place to target developers is in the IDE. So that's why I have my VS Code here open. This is our main interface that StackSpot AI has with developers. We have both the VS Code extension, which is already available in the marketplace, as well as one for the JetBrains family of IDEs, which is available in their marketplace. You guys can go, right? You guys could already log in, or after this talk, you guys can log in and download them and start playing. So here right now, for today's demo, I have a little toy project which I'm showing here for you guys to take a look. I'll give a brief summary of what it's doing. So right now, we have a little toy project that has an abstract class for an SQS listener. and it has an implementation of a S3 image uploader. So I'll be using these later on in the demo. I just want to give you guys a brief summary of what this Kotlin code is doing, because it's going to be part of the demo. And actually, okay, so here, as I mentioned, I don't know if my side panel is showing up. I think they zoomed in a bit. But here on the side panel, we have the StackSpot AI. It has our logo, the logo that's on my shirt, and that was a bit here earlier. And so here, when I click the StackSpot extension, which is with our logo, I'm here on the greeted by our welcome screen. I've taken the liberty of logging in already, but before this screen, there's a login screen where I logged into the account that I'll be using to showcase for you guys. And once I logged in an account, as JB was mentioning, at StackSpot in general, not just our AI, to deliver things to the developers, we package them in what we call workspaces, which roughly equates to while it's not a set in stone standard, we usually explain a workspace as roughly a team, but it's usually a group of people that's working on something similar. So for today's example, right now on my account, I only have a single workspace, which is the AWS workspace, which has some knowledge sources and stacks packaged for me. And the stacks that JB was just mentioning to you guys, that technology vision right now, that's the second big thing that we expect a developer to choose, because a team might have a few stacks going on at the same time that they're managing. But when I'm actually generating code, we generate code for one stack at a time. So right now, today I'll be demoing you guys with the Kotlin stack, which is the language I'm more familiar with, and it's the one for my example code here. So I'll be going with the Kotlin stack, and just giving you guys, I'll show you guys a bit later on, but just giving a brief rundown of what this Kotlin stack has going on. It's a Kotlin and Spring Boot stack for REST APIs. It has open chain dependency for making HTTP requests, JUnit for testing, and those I think are going to be the big ones that I'll be using for today's demo. And so right now, okay, I got lost there. Right now with these two selections, I'm ready to start asking questions to our assistant, and the question is really going to be something that I need to get done. So for example, I might have a task that came in that regards, okay, I need to create an API, an endpoint, that this endpoint, it's going to help me create a Brazilian payment method that roughly translates to bank slip. So I could ask, please write an API that creates a bank slip. And really what I type in, since we're AI-based, we're based on Gen AI, it's really natural language. So I could type in a lot of variations of this as the task came in. It's really up to me as a developer to choose what I want to type in. And after I hit enter, the thinking process starts. And what it's doing right now is it's going through the workspace. It's loading up the stack that I selected earlier. It's grabbing that information. Afterwards, it's going through what knowledge sources have been registered in this workspace, which ones are available to me. It's finding of those knowledge sources, a knowledge source is a big bucket of information. I'll show you guys a bit later on what one actually looks like on our site. But right now, imagine a big bucket of information that we have, a big pool of information. And a lot of that information might have nothing to do with what I just asked. It might have nothing to do with writing an API to create a bank slip. So right now, our thinking process is first it's going through these knowledge sources, finding what piece of information in this pool is actually going to help solve this problem. After it gathers all the relevant informations, it then takes the knowledge source, it takes the stack. It's also coming through what we know of the project. The project is another piece of context that our assistant uses. So it's going to go through all these information. It's finding what is actually relevant to solving the problem at hand. And with those right now, then we do a prompt engineering with all that information and wrap it up in a prompt. And with that, then we begin processing that on an LLM. And that's where the code generation is happening right now. So it's gathering everything that's relevant for writing an API to create a bank slip, and it's going to give me back a piece, and soon we'll have a piece of code that's going to do that for me.
So yeah, one important thing here is that all this process was created by us, so it's something that we develop here. Oops. Yeah. But yeah, again, like I was saying, the important thing is that you can select specific information to input into the system. You can select, for example, codes that you use. You can select the API catalogs that you use. You can input also event schemas. And then, for example, if you need to produce or if you need to consume any of these events, we can do this in a pretty easy way. You just need to ask for something like for the AI, and then we'll have an answer that is highly contextualized. It's going to be used schema to produce and to consume these events. So this is part of the thing, this is part of the job that we're doing here, and this is how we help developers in the day by day.
So here, with this example, I'm going to start here at the end. And one of the things that we believe in strongly to help the developer at the very end is citing our sources. As a developer myself, I really like it if, okay, I got this bunch of code generated, but what was it based on? So here, I'm going to show it to you guys. So here, this answer, it was based from the knowledge source, which I mentioned was that huge pool of information. What we found that matched the user's problem, the problem I presented was, there's this cutout of an open API, and we cut it out so that it's more digestible, since an open API can have a lot of information. It could be almost megabytes worth of information in JSON, and that's really hard to digest at once, and it's not going to be helpful. So we cut it out. And here, what I want to highlight here is that right now we have an endpoint that's a post method that I need to call. It's the bank slip path. It's the bankly.com.br URL. It has two headers, API version authorization. It has a JSON body full of fields, and it has a JSON response, again, full of fields. And here, now we'll take a look at the generated code. And as I mentioned earlier, right now in the answer, it even explained itself a bit, and it said, okay, I'm creating a bank slip, and I'm using Kotlin, Spring Boot, and OpenFeign to do that. And here, as I was showing you guys the API documentation, it's created here for me a Feign client. And with this Feign client, it's already filled out in the standard places to do for a Feign client. It's already filled out the URL, the path, and the method. It's also filled in all the necessary headers that it found. It's also understood that two classes are necessary, and it started filling them out for me. Then it even went a step further and gave me a service. Since I asked for an endpoint, it's created a service, and finally a controller on my end to actually implement this, to do my full task. And since JUnit was also mentioned, I mentioned that we have JUnit. It saw JUnit, and it decided, okay, I'm also going to write tests already. This is something that we don't really have a lot of input on, and we really leave it up to choice. So sometimes it comes and sometimes it doesn't when there's a test framework. So here, all this code looks great to me. So now as a developer, I have three options that are presented to me to interact with this code. The first one is a basic copy feature. Mm-hmm. The second one allows me to insert this whole block of code where my cursor's at in the editor. But for now, since this is a brand new class, the most appropriate one, in my opinion, is a new file. So I'm going to create a new file based on this, on each of the pieces of code. And now I'm ready to save all these and commit and ship them off. And I already have tests so that I can run my pipeline and already have tests done. And then, since tests have already been done, but the generated code doesn't have a lot of documentation, I'll take the opportunity to show you guys another cool feature we have. And here, for example, the Feign client, it's only given a brief commentary on what it did. But before I commit, I might decide, okay, I might want Java docs for this Feign client. But that's going to take me quite a few minutes to get done. Another thing that our extension offers, besides the chat panel here on the left, is we have in the context menu, we have our StackSpot AI context, and we call these quick commands. These are short little one-shot prompts that solve a pretty common problem on a developer day-to-day. So for now, we have these 5, and the one that I'm going to showcase to you guys is to document this code. And now, instead of going to the panel, it's come down here to the bottom, the progress bar. The thinking process is still going on. And here, it's taken this piece of code, and it's gonna rewrite it with some Java docs inserted for me. And here, in a matter of seconds to at most a minute, I'll get back code. I'll get back my same code, but now with a lot of Java docs. It's already done minutes of work for me. And when we look at the initial generation, that was maybe hours of work, if I already had that open API in hand, that got done for me all in a matter of seconds. So that's what we believe, that the power of context is really gonna help generate code that's actually ready to use for developers for their company work. And
important thing here is that we help with maintainability of the code. So he was showing there that we have, for example, a way to find to code smells, to generate test units, even document this code. And all of these stuff this is really important when you're generating code and you need your company to understand what you're doing. Also, we have one of the features that we had there was explain this code. Basically, if you have a new developer coming in to your company and he's facing a new code and he doesn't know what it does, we can just ask for it for the StackSpot AI, and we'll have an answer that will be explaining exactly what their code is doing.
Since JB mentioned the explanation, I might as well go ahead and show you guys. So rather than getting documented code, which would make us look that we're doing it too easy, I took one of the other classes that we generated, and I'm gonna ask for an explanation because maybe this has already been committed to my project, and it's a piece of code that I have to maintain, and I have no idea what it's doing. And when I mentioned in the documentation, it came here to the bottom, and it happened in line in the editor. But an explanation isn't really something that I wanted to touch the code I'm working on. I just want a text that tells me what's going on. So that's why when I chose the explanation option, it came back here onto the chat panel. And here, besides giving a brief summary of what it's doing, it also highlighted what was the actual selection that it's processing. We like giving developers visual feedback. So maybe they might have misselected when they click the command. So that's why we show them what code we're actually running on, so they can have a great idea of what we're doing. And here, now, since it's an explanation, it's giving me a pretty detailed explanation, and it's really broken down step by step. What's going on with this code? What were the decisions made to generate all this code, and why each piece of annotation, each piece of method, each class, what they're trying to accomplish. So this really helps understanding a piece of code that I have to maintain, that I might have no idea what it's doing. So right now, for this little API example, I'm done, and I'm gonna right now click New Chat, and I'll show you guys why in this next test. But the next task I might have at hand right now, I now have a formula to calculate. So I could ask, for example, I have a banking formula called an equivalent interest rate to calculate. But my company might have a specific piece of code, way old COBOL code, that's been there for generations, probably older than me. And that code is really important to the company. That's the way they've been calculating for decades, the equivalent interest rate. And if someone changes that formula, that could result in unimaginable loss for the company. So here, I could ask to provide business logic to calculate the equivalent interest rate. Equivalent interest rate. And again, we now start the thinking process, and we're doing all that I mentioned earlier. We're combing through the knowledge sources. Now we're looking for what information is relevant to solving the problem at hand, which is this equivalent interest rate calculation. And then once we find it, we're wrapping it up in a prompt. We still load up the stack, and the stack is the main driving force of the generated code. So regardless of what language it finds that code in, what the LLM is being instructed is that in our prompt engineering is that it's supposed to generate Kotlin Spring Boot code, because that's the stack. That's what this project is being. That's what we're working with right now. So it's going to take that code, and it's going to rewrite it for me into a more modern approach. So here, again, showing you guys what we found. In this case, the equivalent interest rate is the second program. It found 2 that were relevant, but even with 2, when it finds 2, the actual LLM still looks at all of it and sees what is really relevant. So that's why even with 2 codes, it only used the second one here. And here, I'm sorry, but I'm not a COBOL guy, and I'd probably have to use the explanation to start understanding this. But luckily, since I really just needed a rewrite, our AI has already done all that for me. And so it's taken, since I just asked for business logic, it's generated only a service for me that I could drag in. And again, due to JUnit being declared as our testing framework, I now also have tests for this calculation. So this is another thing we've been doing a lot with StackSpot AI, is we've been looking into working with legacy code and how do we bring it up to date? How do we bring it up to date? And if you guys take a look, this doesn't have any quirks from COBOL in it anymore right now. That's something we find really important when we talk about dealing with legacy code, because some tools might even take COBOL code and rewrite it into Java or rewrite it into Kotlin, but it looks almost like COBOL code. It has almost as many lines, and instead, and that's not how if a modern developer had the task at hand, that's not how he would write that same piece of code.
One important thing here, guys, is that he's showing COBOL, but it could be any language, in fact. So if you want, for example, to modernize a .NET monolith, you can do that too. You can use the StackSpot AI, select your stack, define all the definitions of the stack, and then whatever you ask for the StackSpot AI, it will be generating code in this no specific language. So this is a really important thing here.
Okay, and now, just to show you guys a bit of I mentioned that I was going to show you guys why I did a new chat. So here, I might ask, okay, I see this generated code, and I see here it has it's done a bit of validation. But for one thing that I might want, I'm going to take a look here at this code, and I might look at it and say, okay, please add more validation to the input parameters. And here, right now, when we look at this instruction, it's pretty vague. But the idea here is when I don't do a new chat and I keep talking to our assistant, we're basically having a conversation the same way you might have in the ChatGPT UI, and it knows what we've been talking about. It keeps track of what we've been talking about. So right now, it's not going to try to answer this based on just only what it finds in the knowledge sources. The thinking process now, it's taking a further step of going through, okay, what have we talked about already? What has been going on in this conversation thread we've been having? And so now it's going to also take into consideration that it just answered me the equivalent interest rate calculation and the generated code. And now it's going to look through that, and that's where it's going to do the validation for me. So that's why I did a new chat earlier, because when I'm changing topics, I usually like to just clean the slate so that we don't get messed up with a lot of topics at hand. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to explain it, and now's the time for that to happen. So it's going through this code. It's going through now the code, as I mentioned when I was writing the prompt with you guys. And it's looking through, okay, I need to validate more. It's already checked that the numbers aren't negative, which is a pretty basic validation for financial calculation. But when we're talking about these numbers, since these are percentages, they probably have an upper limit as well. So right now, that's what I'm expecting that's going to go on. It's going to reread its code, and I'm having our assistant think further about what it's doing.
So what we're saying about hyper-contextualization is that we take the project into consideration when generating code. We take into consideration all the knowledge source that you input into the system, the stacks that you input into the system. We have all the chat history that we are also using to generate new code here. So all of this is taken into consideration. This is why we call hyper-contextualized, since all this information are taken into consideration to give you a better output. And this is really something that is important, because other than that, we'll have generic answers. And probably, if you're here, you already use some other applications that also deliver code generation. And you can see that if you ask things, they will be generally very generic. So here's a way for us to do it in a better way. LG, maybe you can show the architecture.
Right now, I'll give you guys a brief look into our architecture and how we're getting all this done right now, which has to do with the question I was asked, a bit of the question that I was asked earlier. Right now, we have for a few front ends going on, the major ones being the UI, which I'll show briefly after I come back from the VS Code. And we have our two extensions, the VS Code and the IntelliJ. These are our major UIs. We have a small integration with our CLI, but the big ones are our UI and our IDE extensions. And I'm going to start with the UI. The UI, which I'm going to show shortly, it's more of a management flow. It's how does all that information that I showed, all that context, how does it come into the system? And right now, the major way to do that is through our UI. We are also working on some APIs that can be called to do more of a bulk processing. But right now, the UI is the major way. And the UI, it's going to call our API. And when it makes that call to the API, the agent space isn't going to really come into action when it comes to the UI. Instead, it's going to go to the embeddings to process all that information, to actually make it digestible. And then it's going to store it in our knowledge source databases, which was the question I was asked earlier. So all the information, all this context that we're gathering, we store them in our knowledge source databases. And then when the extensions come into play, they're the ones that are actually calling the agent. So when they make a request, the API loads up the appropriate agent. I've shown you guys the Dev Assistant agent, which was the one that was answering the chat panel. And I've also showed you guys a bit of the built-in quick commands agent. We're also right now, we're releasing a custom quick commands agent. So rather than just having those quick commands that were already baked into the system that I could just click on my own, the custom quick command is us allowing the users on our platform to design their own quick commands. So they might have tasks at hand that are really specific to their scenario that we weren't able to imagine. The ones we built in are ones that are just pretty much every dev everywhere has. But there might be a specific use of AI that's really particular to a company that we haven't envisioned. So that's why we created the custom quick commands. And then that's a brief overview of our agents. And then we also interact with other pieces of StackSpot, which is the parts on the bottom. The workspaces I've shown you guys already. So workspaces is a common concept across all of StackSpot. It is not exclusive to our AI offering. The studios, I'll show you guys, sorry about that. The studios I'll show briefly when I go to our website. And the actions are used by our custom quick commands. So besides just talking to an AI, we have actions for them to actually get things done. And then the agents, once an agent is running, I forgot to mention, but whereas in the UI, the agents would use the embeddings and they would store things in the knowledge sources, the agents, they're the ones that are actually combing through the knowledge sources and looking through that data and finding what is relevant to answering questions. And then once it does that, then we do some prompt engineering, our API, and then that's when we go to our LLM. And that's where the code is actually being generated. It's in our LLM. Okay. So right now, I've talked a lot about our site. I think I'll show you guys a bit of that. So here we have, this is our site. Again, I've logged into the same account I was using it in my IDE. And I'll give you guys a little peek under the hood of what we were seeing. So I mentioned StackSpot Studios. The studios is where it's a concept of who's actually creating all these stacks. And I think I'm going to zoom in a bit so you guys can see better. And right now, here we have, just in the backend studio, we have 5 different stacks, even though I didn't have all of them on my workspace. But the one that we saw a lot and that I gave you guys a brief rundown, and I got to actually show you, is our Kotlin. This is what an AI stack looks like. The AI stack, as we've been experimenting with LLMs, we saw that they pretty much know technology already. We don't really need to teach them a lot about technology. They understand these things. So it knows what Kotlin is. It knows what Spring Boot is, JUnit, and all these things here. It's aware. So when we created the Stack AI to make it easy for people to just create them and write out their technology vision, we saw that they really just needed to really just lay out what technology are we using. With a few words, they could already get that set up. So all of this is just textual input. Same thing here with the cloud attributes. In this case, we don't have one, but we could also, this stack might have some specific settings for what cloud it wants to run on and what of that cloud it's using. So for example, it might only want to use RDS and S3. So those would be laid out in the cloud attributes. And that's a brief look into our stacks. The second one I'll show you guys is the knowledge source that we saw. I'll show you guys both the legacy applications and the payment API. So as I mentioned that it's a big pool of information. In our demo account here, for example, that number right next to the name is how many items, how many actual pieces of information are in there. And so when you guys saw my demo, I only had one JSON that was used, but the actual knowledge source, it has 21. So of these 21, we looked through all of them, and we found which one was relevant to the question at hand. And that's what the thinking process was all about. It was going through all this information, and a lot of it had nothing to do with the actual problem at hand. And then, going back up here a bit, in the add file button here in the knowledge source I was mentioning, this is the main way to get right now information to provide the context, is through file upload. On our site, you can use individual file upload, and we have endpoints that can be called to do zips, to send a lot of files at once to us. And here, just giving you guys a brief overview of this cool little text option, it allows, once you're doing upload, before you actually ship it off to the developers, the manager who's doing all this upload, or the architect, he can also test the knowledge objects and see and he can already do some tests. Okay, what could a developer write here? And that'll actually bring, so he can see if maybe he might need to check the description or something that he's provided that might be a bit incomplete. So you can already do a preview. This is the API one, and as I mentioned, the legacy application one, which has some COBOL programs. This is the other one that I used, just giving you guys a brief look. This one is a bit smaller, but we were still able to find the proper program. And then, lastly, I'll go here into our workspace, and right now we have one. And as I showed you guys earlier in the studios, we could have a lot of stacks in our account, but in the end, that has to be packaged up into workspace. So of the many stacks that we have right now, only 3 backend stacks and 2 front-end stacks were chosen for this workspace. And when it comes to knowledge sources, when I showed you guys, there were 4 knowledge sources on right now in this account, but only 2 of them were assigned to me. That's why it didn't even comb through the other ones. It's using only the ones that were shown here that have been assigned.
And this is important because as your governance team of your enterprise, you can select exactly the kind of information, which stack, all this context that I was saying to you guys, we can understand and input to the specific workspace, to specific team, this information to be used. In this way, it's kind of, we're creating an agent that is specialized to give directions to this specific team. So this is what you're doing here. That's it?
Oh, sorry. And that was the rundown of our site where all the management interface is done.
And so just to remember, you guys, I already told you all about it, but StackSpot AI, it's all about the hyper-contextualization. Yeah, we have a generative AI assistant here that can help you enhancing the code experience. And of course, we have what you're calling here the knowledge sources in which we can leverage the power of the AI together with the knowledge sources to guarantee that we're delivering to you a contextualized answer. And lastly, we do believe that the custom quick comments can help you in your day-by-day by automating things that you're doing like multiple times in a day, and we can do that in a fast way and help you with the experience, and also enhancing productivity. And I just wanted to invite you guys to try StackSpot for free. We have a QR code on the left side. This one is for guaranteeing that you can log into the platform and test it out for yourselves. And on the right side, you have join us Discord. So we have a Discord community in which you can just can find all of the developers there, the product team, the support team, and we are there to help you guys with that and to have your feedback, because this is really important, and we want to give you a better product. So this is a thing that we want to do, and we really wanted to thank you all guys to be here. Before we close here, of course, we want to hear if you have more questions. And remember, if you want to lead the change, just ask. We're StackSpot AI.